Om Ishvaro Gururatmeti Murtibheda Vibhagine Vyomavad Vyapta Dehaya Dakshina Murtaye Namaha. Okay, so it's been a while since we met, looks like. But anyway, we'll continue. We'll continue with our questions. So there is a couple of questions here which I don't know, I may have addressed, perhaps not enough, but they've come back. So I'm going to, again comment on them. Or maybe I didn't fully discuss it at that point. So anyway, let us look at them. So good questions. So one is, how do we distinguish between being attached to someone and the negative connotations associated with attachment, and the purity of love and the more positive connotations attached to this latter sentiment? If we never get attached to an individual, how do we love them unconditionally? Surely these sentiments are intertwined with each other, attachment and love. Okay. So this is, this is all that, to some extent, it's a issue with words. So any word is like that. The words don't have only one meaning. Words have different meanings. Same word can be used, or it has different shades of meanings. And the meaning changes also contextually. The context is always important. So when we use words like attachment and love, we need to look at the context. So here, when we say, positive, the other thing is positive and negative connotations. There is no, these words represent sentiments. No sentiment in itself is necessarily positive or negative, you know. Okay. Your sentiment is a sentiment. A sentiment doesn't itself carry a value, you know, but then it is everything else that gets associated with it, with a given sentiment. So what it is, what is the context, where does it come from, what does it do to me, what does it lead to, all those things. So when we use words like attachment and love, it's not that it has always, attachment has a negative connotation, or that love always has a positive connotation either. We say bound by love, you're bound by love. So things like that, bound by attachment. So a sentiment is a sentiment, and a sentiment also doesn't, sangat jayate kamaha, it says in Gita. So when there is sangaha, there is association, there is constant association with something. Maybe an object, it may be a person, it may be a commercial you see on TV repeatedly, keep seeing again and again and again, and they focus on only some quality of the object. And so then that becomes highlighted. And becomes highlighted, then that is what is becomes important. And then everything else is forgotten. And so now I want this. So this kind of thing goes on. So then Sangaha gives rise to kama, a desire to acquire. Now, it doesn't happen to everybody, happens to somebody. So, or some people, to some it doesn't. So some then want the object, some don't want the object, some don't care for it. So different reactions it evokes in us. So attachment, love, they're also like that. Here, when it is talked in terms of a value, so when we talk about value in Bhagavad Gita, it says, Anabhishvangaha, Putra Dara Grihadishu Anabhishvangaha. Anabhishvangaha is excessive attachment. Okay, excessive attachment. Ati Sneha. These are all different words. Sneha, Prema, Kama, all are these words used for love. And they have different shades of meaning in different contexts. So here, he says excessive attachment to something can lead to difficulties. Okay. Because then they can lead to dependence. Okay. We know this. Love is not always positive. So love, if you love me, you'll do this. If you love me, you do that. So our sentiments also are connected to our thinking, to our understanding, to our cognitive process. And they get influenced by that also. So sentiments get influenced by the way we think, the way we judge, the way we interpret, what our values are. All of those things affect our sentiments. And at the same time, sentiments also affect the way we think. You know, if I'm anxious, if I'm worried, if I'm sad, if I'm angry, and things like that, then my thinking process gets affected. I make poor judgments. I reach wrong conclusions. So these things all kind of go together. So here it's presented in the form of a value. So, and a caution. So one always needs to be cautious when it comes to these sentiments, any sentiments, but even these kinds of sentiments like love, attachment, and all, as a possibility. What can it lead me to? In which direction? So that I can prevent myself. I can have a proper understanding. I can, have right values and so on. So he says attachment is something that can cause issues if I get this excessive attachment that impairs my judgment, that affects my relationship, and so doesn't let me be objective and so on. So that is the idea here. So then there are some other sub questions are also there. uh, the purity of love, so what is pure love, impure love? Again, so when we say use words like this, so what we are talking about is contextually, it is something. If that same sentiment can create a problem for me, or the same sentiment need not create a problem for me, also depends on what it is for. So not love can be one which is, if it's associated with being demanding, with anger, with insecurities and all that, then that can prevent me. It impedes my growth, it impedes my maturity. But when it is free from that, then it aids my growth. Bhakti, devotion is also like that. Devotion is also love. Parama prema swarupa bhakti, the love of a mother, the love of a devotee, the love of a consort. These are all have different contextual meanings and also different possibilities. The same love can be a problem, same love need not be a problem. So that is the idea of, so looking at these things and as a value. you know how do we love someone unconditionally if you don't get attached to someone? So again, here come in, not all attachment leads to unconditional love. Not all absence of attachment leads to it either. So are they connected? Or what is unconditional love? So unconditional love is something that comes from me, not based on anything else. So it just comes from me because that is my nature. So it's more of a giving. It's like give. What is giving? So there are all kinds of giving. There is conditional giving, there is unconditional giving. So give charity. Is conditional or unconditional? Because there's a lot of expectations there. So sometimes in giving charity, or sometimes it is giving charity because out of the spontaneous, you want to help somebody, you help. There is no other expectation at all. So even if the person rejects it, it doesn't matter. If it takes it, it doesn't matter. In the sense, I'm not going to have my reaction based on my expectations, depending on how the person reacts to it and all that. So when it comes to things like that, and love is also something which naturally one gives. One gives when you have love for things where there is no expectation at all on one side for anything in return, you know, that would be beneficial to me. I give something which is beneficial to somebody else because it is beneficial to somebody else and because perhaps they need it or whatever the reason may be. But I do not seek to derive any particular benefit for it from myself, including punyam. For a wise person, Even punyam is not an issue, So that is unconditional. So like that, for that one doesn't need to be attached to an object or not attached to an object. In fact, if attachment is a prerequisite, then is it unconditional? That's the question. So I only give to those I'm attached to. What happens if I'm not attached to somebody and then I'm not able to give love to that person? That's not true either. So it doesn't always go together. Yeah. So anyway, so that is something to keep in mind. It's a value. When we talk of values, they're always relative, you know. Values are always relative. So in terms of context and so on. Next question. It is explained that we can reach moksha through bhakti yoga, karma yoga, and jnana yoga. Do we go in stages from bhakti to karma to jnanam, or can we get moksha through practicing any one of the above sincerely? Sincerely. Okay. This is a very, very common, question, and which is very natural given that we look upon these three things distinctly. That seems to be a new phenomenon in the last couple of 100 years. So there are three paths. They talk of the three paths to moksha. And one is bhakti yoga, karma yoga, and jnana yoga. Really speaking, if you look at the older teaching literature, it doesn't really present it quite this way, as three different individual paths that are distinct from each other. When I'm trying to understand what is bhakti, what is karma, what is jnanam, so what is the role of these different things? Okay, what is upasana? Then I look at each one individually. But that does, it's like you go to medical school and then so first year you learn anatomy, anatomy. Then the next year then you learn pathology, then you learn physiology, and then you learn this medicine, and then surgery, and then there's the ENT. All different specialties are there, different in different subject matters you study. And then you see this patient. Okay. And he's a young student. So he studies this. So when you look at the patient then, this fellow has studied very good in anatomy, top of the class, very good in pathology, top of the class, and hasn't yet gotten to medicine, hasn't yet gotten to general surgery. Okay. And he looks at the patient, and the patient doesn't fit your knowledge profile because you haven't learned that part of it. When you see the patient, okay, when you see so you won't even think of those things. So before you study surgery and you look at a patient, he comes with something and you're trying to figure out what's wrong. You only think from one aspect. You don't think of the overall thing. But really speaking, at the end of the whole education, when you look at the patient, you look at all systems together. You don't look at just one system at a time, even though each one is part of the patient. Okay. So this is something like that. I study karma and bhakti and jnanam and upasana and all. That doesn't mean that each of these is an independent thing, independent of all the others. Because I am not like that. A human being is not built up that way. So I am made up of karma, jnanam, bhakti, upasana, everything in terms of my functioning. I'm somebody as a human being. I have to do things. So doing actions is part of my living, is part of my being. I cannot I cannot just be stationary without any activity. Same way. So I have a mind. I have a mind that functions in a twofold way. It is cognitive. It thinks, it concludes, it interprets, it misinterprets, it makes judgments, it projects, it knows, it doesn't know. That's my cognitive mind, you know, or the cognitive functioning of my mind. That's how we define it. Then there are sentiments. That's not all I am made up of. I also have sentiments. I have a mind that functions in terms of emotions, feelings. So I have feelings that are desirable to me because they make me feel good. I have empathy, I have compassion, I have love, I have, and then there are feelings that I go through that are very unpleasant, suffering and pain and sorrow and uh, anxiety, all kinds of things. This is what I am. This is what I experience. I visualize things. I can imagine things. So this is all part of upasana, is something like that. It's not concrete. It's more abstract. So I look beyond what I see. The senses perceive what I see, but I can project my thinking beyond that. That is a kind of an upasana, is something like that. So these are all different aspects of me functioning. I cannot separate one from the other. I cannot function only in terms of emotions, only in terms of cognition, only in terms of activity. It doesn't happen like that. So all these have to come together. All these have to come together. There cannot be karma. Who's performing the karma? Who's performing actions? A person is performing actions. And what are my actions influenced by? They are influenced by my thinking. They are influenced by my feelings. They are influenced by my values, my judgment, my desires. See, all kinds of, you cannot separate one from the other. We already saw how feelings, my feelings and my thinking, my judgment, my understanding, misunderstanding, all they influence each other. They are interconnected. So bhakti doesn't mean only feelings, feelings, feelings. It's not bhakti. Feelings about what? Feelings towards what? You know? And neither is jnanam totally separate from everything else. Because, that's why even a person who suppose bhaktas are described, not in a vacuum. Bhakta has bhakti towards something. That's the meaning of bhakti. Bhakti is always directed towards, I am devoted to something. I'm not just a devotee. I'm a devotee of something. I'm devoted to something, whether it's a family, whether it's my profession, whether it's Bhagavan. So, this karma, bhakti, jnanam really cannot be separated from each other. Now, the question is, where do I start? Does one lead to the other? My teacher you all give this example of spaghetti. When you want to eat spaghetti, the spaghetti is noodles. So the noodles cook together, put together, and I want to just take one string at a time. One noodle at a time. It doesn't happen. You try to pick up one noodle, others also come along with that. So it is you cannot take one at a time. All of them will be together. Okay, no, what about predominantly? Okay, no, this is not like that. I understand all that. But then when I say bhakti, I mean predominantly emotional, predominantly thinking kind of a cognitive person. Like one came from Mars, one came from Venus. So everybody who comes from the Venus starts with Bhakti Yoga. Everyone who comes from Mars starts with Jnana Yoga. Is it like that? Not like that either. People think like this, because you go to a puja, and then in a puja, what happens? Somebody has a puja in their house, they invite a lot of friends, and then they all come. And many times you see this. So it's not uncommon at all. So what happens? All the guys, or not all the guys, but many of the guys, they will sit in another room. Okay, rooms are not that big to accommodate everybody. So the smaller room, so all those guys try to gravitate there. Then women and children will gravitate towards where the room where the puja is going on. And these ones are focused more. Those ones are talking about whatever sports or money. This is not uncommon. Okay, we see this. So is it like that? It's really not like that either. So does what applies to whom? So even if you look at it, we start from where we are at. Every jiva is like that. Each individual is at some point. I'm at some point in my life. Arjuna, did he start with karma yoga? Did he start with bhakti yoga? Or did he start with jnana yoga? Just think of this. He was very cognitive person. Look at all the questions and all that he asks in Bhagavad Gita. He's thinking person, all jnanam, full of jnanam. He knew also. He didn't start from a blank slate. He was somebody who was born in the culture, who had studied with gurus, all different kinds of it, studied with great teachers. So he was not an ignorant person. He was very well informed. At the same time, he was in an emotional state there, helpless, wreck, anxious, contextually, in that context, if you remember. And what was his problem? Should I do or should I not do? Should I fight or should I not fight? Now tell me, what point was he starting? In Bhagavad Gita, I'm talking about. Okay. Bhagavad Gita is in Mahabharata. The Mahabharata started somewhere else. But Bhagavad Gita wise, at what point he started? He is everything. But this was a context. In a certain context, his thinking, all reasonable. He had reasonable doubts and questions. Nothing was unreasonable. He wasn't even imagining things like we imagine sometimes and create problems. He was in a situation and then he was thinking and then went into an emotional state of confusion. And at that time, he got immobilized. All karma, bhakti, jnanam, everything is there. He starts with. Okay. But that is the point at which he started. So each jiva, we all have all three aspects to ourselves. And at some point in our journey of life, so we go this way, that way, we turn towards, a pursuit which is different. And that is the point we start. Whether it is born of confusion or born of thinking, inquiry, whether it's associated with sentiments or not, to whatever degree, it has to do something I have to do action-wise or not, whatever it may be. It doesn't really matter how we start, where we start. It all depends on the individual. And then since they are interconnected, they are totally interconnected. Sentiments always occur in the context of some thinking process, understanding process. Whether they are all sentiments are natural and they are valid also. They are valid from the standpoint of being a sentiment. In the sense, I feel in a particular way because it is how I feel. It is natural. certain circumstances evoke certain sentiments, Then the other thing is that what is it that brought it out? What thinking process manifested these sentiments? Was it reasonable? Was it unreasonable? Was it wrong? Was it right? Was it a distortion on my part? Sentiment may be legitimate, I mean, reasonable. But is the thinking behind it right? Wrong thinking can also create right sentiments in the sense certain thinking creates, I misjudged something which made me angry. It was my misjudgment. The anger part of it was natural because this kind of thinking evokes anger. Somebody insults me. It is natural to be angry. The initial reaction. Okay. Because it's defensive. I get hurt, I react. Okay. But the original interpretation of mine was wrong. So in this, was I right or was I wrong? I would say both. My anger part of it was right because I thought in a certain way and then therefore I became angry. Unavoidable. But it was wrong to think what I thought. Well, that was my that mistake came from me. But if I was not wrong, then I would not have been angry. So therefore, angry was also wrong in a sense. Okay, you get it. So these are all, it's not that simple, but they are all so intertwined and interconnected. Karma, bhakti, jnanam, they all come together. That's the whole idea of studying them. But we shouldn't forget that it's not like there are three different ways and this kind of one person. No, so we always think now which is easy. Suppose somebody says, I want to go somewhere and then ask somebody and say, oh, well, there are three different ways you can go. Then you also want to know, okay, which is the shortest way? Which is the way that takes less time, depending on what you're looking for? Which is the way which is more scenic? Okay, so here also, the next question will be which is quicker? I want to get to moksha faster. Is bhakti faster? Jnanam faster? Karma faster? What is easy or easier? Jnanam looks very difficult. Because studying is always a problem. Never get over study. This conflict with the study. Kids always have problem. It's studying. Problem is not studying. Problem is the exam. Suppose you tell there's no exams. No such thing as exams. Do away with exams. Just study what you want to know. Just fulfill your quest for knowledge in a little bit of a directed way. Then nobody will stop wanting to know. But in any case, that's not a discussion here. But so these things are there, they come together. And so one starts with whatever you start with, doesn't matter. But eventually, it's all one thing. Mm. How does our Hinduism explain the death of a newborn or in uterine deaths? These children have not committed any sin in this birth yet. Okay. Okay, let me just address the second point first. Okay. Because it's more straightforward. This, birth, this children committing or not committing birth in this life really is not connected to the death, really speaking. Because so death and birth is not a consequence of committing sin. Okay. That's not our concept. We are not born of sin. We are not born because of sin. We are not born of sin. So in fact, nobody committed sin to connect it to birth. None of us did. None of us is. They say that it is because somebody else did. Then, in fact, then I would say that that person was better off. God was partial to that person because at least that person had a chance. They had a chance. They had an option, and they did something wrong, and so they were punished for that. But then after that, for some reason, God carried his vengeance to everybody else. At least he should give everybody else the same chance. So it is, though, this is not connected. This birth and all, they're not connected to sin anyway. So that is not the issue here. But the question here is the more significant part of it. We always have this question, that a human being is born for some purpose. Okay, we wonder about that. Am I born for some purpose? At least. But looks like there might be, or at least to live a life, you know. And so this child didn't even get a chance to live a life. So what was the point? You always wonder about that. Was there a point to this child's presence or being there? Remember, the very question itself kind of implies here that even though the child is not born, we still look upon the child as a being, a living being. Okay. So born or not born is a relative term. We take a point, at some point we say this person is born into the world. Okay. You're born into the world. Can't even really say that. Even in uterine is born into the world only. So when is a jiva is born? When is a jiva born? Is a born is when life begins. Whatever. It's an arbitrary point that we take. Okay. So now this being is there. And now, but he's not born as what we consider as birth into the world. And the individual dies. So now the question is, what was the purpose? Purpose from our standpoint, we are asking. Because we only see a purpose. Do we only see a purpose after a child is born? When I am born into this world, one is, what is my situation? I interact with the world. I am born in order to live. And to live means I have to experience. I experience the world around me. I experience the world of objects and I experience the world of other beings, so many living beings, including people, in my parents, my family, those that become my family, and so on. So the human life, my life as an individual, as a jiva, is all about experiencing and interacting with a world made up of objects and people, other individuals. That is the life of a being, even other beings. Now, when a jiva is born, comes into being, whether it is in uterine or not yet outside uterine, okay, what happens? Is it experiencing a world? Is it interacting with people? Yes, I would say yes. Not the way we experience the world, but definitely to a great extent the way we experience people. Okay, really speaking, if you think about it, now here also perhaps the being, the jiva, the baby is not aware so much, but it's a very real thing for others, becomes part of their life, you know, becomes part of their experience. So when we are born into this world, we are not born isolated as individuals. We are born into an environment. They say, scriptures say, to help a jiva grow in his journey towards a certain end, ultimate end, to rediscover that oneness with the Lord, etc. So in this journey involves this process of growth, maturity, which happens in interactions with others. We influence each other in life, you know. And so even the baby very much is a part of somebody's life. Just imagine, we say, what was the point of this individual's presence or life when it wasn't born? It has a very big purpose. We don't understand all of it, but we see the effect of it, you know. You see, I had one time I had to go and do something. Uh, Somebody, they asked me to come because they lost their baby, I think at 2 days after birth, 2 days. And usually they don't do the usual rituals and all, so they asked me to come and do some ceremony, something to do. So anyway, I went there. Now this, I know these people. We all may know somebody like that. So then something like that happens, it changes the person's life forever. It changes a parent's life forever because somebody came into their life and went away and didn't even quite be there. Whatever it is, but it changes you as a person. Just that experience of being, I am totally unconnected to this, but I had to somehow ended up do something which I had not ever thought of or imagined. That became part of my experience. I still talk about it sometimes. This happened decades ago. So what I'm saying is that what one individual does to others, sometimes not all experience of ours are centered around us. Our interactions with the world sometimes are for others. Just as others influence me, help me grow, help me regress, same way I also influence others to help them grow, perhaps to help them in whichever way. So why a jiva came into this situation and then for for how long we don't know, whether I'm born or not born. Nobody knows how long they are going to be around to influence each other. Okay. So one cannot say, when we wonder what was the purpose, we have to keep that in mind, that there is a lot of purpose to all of these things. Because we don't see enough, we don't understand enough, we don't recognize enough. So we think that it's pointless. But it's not pointless. Just ask the parents who lost the baby who was not born, how it influenced them. So there is always a purpose to things. It's just that when you start thinking about it, you see how else it doesn't explain in the sense you look at the whole context. It is not meaningless or without any explanation or without any reason, definitely. That much we can see. We won't understand all of it. So it's an important question that comes up in people's minds all the time. Okay. There's one question about Sagunam and Nirgunam. I think I will keep that for next time because that's, it's, technical words are there that have technical meanings. So, but there's one more question, so I'll kind of touch upon that. Does the practice of journaling help in any way in keeping the mind steady? Okay. So this, I'm supposing journaling is a term for writing journal. Like, yeah. So this mind steadiness of the, there are two terms are used with respect to mind. One is called as antakarana shuddhi and one is called antakarana naischalyam. You know, antakarana shuddhi means so purification of the mind, purifying the mind, okay, or having a mind that is pure. And antakarana naischalyam means a steady mind, a mind that is not restless. So, in short, so here, what is this purifying the mind? You know, when when I have to purify something, the presumption is that there is some impurity. There's some impurity that has to be removed. That is all the purification process. What is pure and what is impure is a side issue, connected but a side issue. If I'm trying to purify gold to obtain gold, then it has copper in it. I'll remove the copper. Then I get pure gold. But if I'm looking for pure copper, then gold is the impurity. I have to remove the gold, even though it's more valuable. Okay, impurity is more valuable. There was I went to see a goldsmith shop in India. This old time goldsmith shop. Okay, so here, so not like all this sophisticated stuff. So at the end of the day, he takes not at the end of the day, every so often he'll take a broom and he sweeps the dust. It's very dirty, dusty, not a clean place particularly. But he has all these furnaces and all he's doing, all his gold work. But every so often he will take a broom, sweep everything, and all this dust collects. You know how it is there in India. So dust collects, and this dust he takes and puts it in a bag. And so like this, so then I was I asked him, how come you're sweeping this and then you're just collecting? What do you do? He's saying, no. Then he took me, he said, come with me. So he takes me to a back room and there is a sack there, a big sack where he puts this. There's a big sack of this dust which he has swept. And then he told me that this things which he sweeps or from the floor, he collects it in a sack and then he sells that to somebody else. Because he said that from that, some gold dust somehow, somebody extracts the gold dust from his sweepings of the floor that he collects in this shop, from the work that he is doing. Not that you can see anything. I couldn't see any gold there. But he said there is gold there. So anyway, it's interesting, this purity and impurity business. So here anyway, coming back to the mind, So there are things in the mind that has to do with our way of thinking, values, and so on, that impede our growth and maturity, spiritual growth, even ordinary emotional growth. Those are what are considered to be impurity. So, like certain kinds of sentiments, anger, for example, that don't really help me mature, be a person who's, because it makes me unhappy. Things that make me unhappy, uncomfortable, things that make me happy, content, those are the positives, things we call positive and negative. So what is it? What are the ways to reduce those kinds of impurities, so-called impurities, and they have the kind of thinking that has to do with attitudes that are going to make it easier for me to be a happier person, a calmer person, a more content person. So that has to do with values, judgment, proper thinking. So for antakarana shuddhi, one has to understand values. What do I have? How do I understand a value? Truthfulness is a value. Why should I be truthful? Whoever said this? Who made it up? Why is it not just, is it the same as being untruthful? After all, who decides which is better? All these kinds of things are there, which one needs to understand. Otherwise, if I don't value truthfulness, suppose truthfulness and untruthfulness are equal in value, then I can choose either one. I will choose something which is more beneficial to me. You know, why should I choose one over the other? No, one is better. The children always will ask parents all these questions. And the parents run into a brick wall, not knowing how to answer also. Why is it better? Who said it's better? Just because it feels good, it's better. It feels bad, it's better. Whatever. So we get all kinds of things we answer. But the point is that one has to understand what is the value of a value. What can I gain? What can I lose if I follow the value or if I don't follow the value? I have to have something to gain. A human being doesn't do anything otherwise. I have to something to gain by following a good value. I should have something to lose by not following a good value, then I will value it and I will tend to try to follow it. So those are the kinds of things one does to make one's mind pure or free from all these other impediments. What is this steadiness of the mind? That has more to do with the way my mind thinks, restless, all over the place, directed, very sense directed, like a hyperactive mind, you know, distractible mind. It may have right values, not so much connected. It's not an impure mind. A restless mind is not a necessarily impure mind, relatively speaking. So the person has, but is restless, is out of habit, not particularly introspective. So then the person, I want to be calm. How do I be calm? You can do so many things you can do. So listen to the music, sit in a calm environment. Don't go to a bar on a Saturday evening to be calm. Not going to be easy. even if you can make it happen. Because there's too much going on around that is distracting. One is things get away from things that are distracting, and learn to be not distracted, you know. So there are certain practices that come in for the steadiness of the mind. Steadiness of the mind. So when you study, for example, you know, learning to focus, meditation, these are the kinds of disciplines. Various spiritual disciplines are there, or other disciplines are there, or we find certain tasks to do, listening to music, to cut down on the distractions. That helps me make my mind steadier and calmer. So that is Antakarana Shuddhi and Antakarana Naischalyam. So now you can answer writing journals, for example. What does it do? It does helps both, I would say. Because, to sit and write, I have to think, I have to focus, I cut down, I have to be away from distractions. So to some extent, it does make my mind steady. Because by cutting down on that, it makes me more introspective, it makes me more focused, it makes me less distractible or less distracted. But at the same time, it depends on what I'm writing in writing a journal. What I'm writing. It can make me agitated also when you think about it, depending on what I'm writing. So in my journal, I write, today I had a problem with my neighbor. And he did this. And he did that. Then I start writing down what all he did. Not only today, yesterday also. And then last week. Then ever since I've come to this place, this fellow has been harassing me. And then even before I came to this place, that other house also, there was another neighbor like that. So this fellow goes on and on. His whole life of sorrows is writing in his journal, getting more and more agitated and upset in the process. So it can happen that way too, or so depending on what one is writing about and one state of mind, and it can make me more agitated, it can make me less agitated. And sometimes it can help me purify my mind too. When I'm more contemplative and introspective and, working through my own confusions and issues, it gives me clarity. So that way it can help. Both ways it can help, really, I would say. Okay, so with that, we'll stop for today, and then we'll look at those other questions next time. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om.